Board of Trustees of Wednesday, September 13th, 2017 is now in order. The first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Do we have any changes to the minutes? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move approval of the minutes of August 9, 2017.
Second. Okay. All in favor? Okay. And then we have public participation for items not identified. And the first one, and tonight we can do 3 minutes. If you're pulling, you can do 5 minutes. So the first person is Pat Billig.
My name is Pat Billig. I live at 3390 Longwood Avenue in Boulder, and I'm here representing the Audubon Society, Boulder County Audubon Society. This is just a general concern that we have that I would say is just to keep it in mind for the next year, and that is the topic being disposal of open space lands. And I know when I was on the board, there were always little pushes to kind of quote-unquote simplify the process, but it's pretty clear in the charter the process that needs to be followed for any disposal, whether it's within the city government or to a private party. And Audubon is just concerned that this process is really held to because there's a lot of pressure against it sometimes. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Next one is Karen Holwick.
Karen Holwig, 4440 Greenbrier Boulevard. And I was pleased to see in the back of the packet the information piece on the Eldo Canyon Walker Ranch Trail feasibility study. And to know that with partnering agencies, staff has been discussing multiple options for those trails and sleuthing out possibilities. What concerned me is the backside of this memo, which is page 43 of 45 in your electronic packet. Because I'm a firm follower and advocate of the Public Participation Working Group recommendations and report that was recently issued. And when I look at this sequence of steps, I say to myself, according to the Public Participation Working Group recommendations, after staff defines, refines trail alternatives and evaluation criteria at the beginning of this sequence, I think we need to have public participation. And I don't see it there on the map, so I'd like to see you all suggest that revision because I think it's a really important step to get this off on the right track. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. The next one is Randy Stroh is not speaking.
I'm giving her. I yielded my minutes to Gwen Dooley.
Okay, Gwen.
Hi there, Gwen Dooley, 730 Spruce, and a former OSBT member for 8 years. 4 years as chair, back when we had money to buy land with. I would like to request that you have a public hearing on Mapleton 311 on October 11th. For one reason, I think Bill Lamont, who was the planning director back in the 60s, will be here in town for the 50th anniversary of the open space sales tax passage. And I think he might be able to speak to you about some of the history there of the site. It's my understanding that you've been told that you really have nothing to say about this, the 311 site. I beg to disagree. As you know, you are the only board of trustees in the city, and you're there for a particular reason in that capacity. You have a higher duty than most boards to protect the land and the monies that go with it for the citizens of Boulder. And this property is, as you know, borders right on purchased open space and land that has been used by the citizens and visitors for a century or more. So it's a crucial piece that interfaces between our wild lands to the west and our urban lands to the east. A few years ago, about 6 years ago, I guess, the academy, the junior academy, was redeveloped just to the north, and it only has about a third the size of the acreage. When that was happening, the wildlife was incredibly disturbed. They were running rampant all over the neighborhood, especially coyotes. Their dens were disturbed. The machinery, the earth moving, it just wreaked havoc on the entire neighborhood. I lost 2 cats, and I live some distance. I'm over on Spruce, 700 block, to a mountain lion and another to a coyote. And the coyotes were howling in the neighborhoods. So you have to take that into account with any sort of development of this land. And it's a crucial piece for all the citizens of Boulder. So please hold a public hearing on it in October so people can express their views on this. Yes, we all need, especially as we age, we need housing. Some of us will be able to age in place. I'm fortunate that way, but some won't. But this will not be for the average person. These are going to be very expensive places, just like the academy is. You have to have a lot of bucks to move in there. So it's not that it's a necessity for this community to have a high, expensive housing complex for the elderly in this community. If it were lower, yes, it'd make more sense. But please open it up to the public on the 11th. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alan Delamere. And you're pooling with Sheila.
You'll be delighted to know I don't have a PowerPoint to present tonight, but the things that are being passed around, there's one, the end plot in it is the thing I want you to pay attention to. But before we do that, I've been working on the sensor data that we got from Mount Sanitas, and I've done an awful lot of work with it and with detailed plots. And one of the things I've got, I'm not sure whether I sent this to you. I sent it to a number of staff members. It's got lots of plots in by month and so on. But in the course of doing this, one of the things that hit home is that we really need to know what the rate of change of usage is. We can wait until next year and we'll have a few data points. But I particularly feel it's important that we keep monitoring those 3 sensors at Sanitas. So I've been working with staff, and I got the bureaucratic answer yesterday. Sorry, they are sticking to their current agenda and they're not going to do anything. So I'm appealing to Tracy, I hope, to turn that monitoring on and allow us to get, say, 3 or 4 months of data that we compare between this year and last year. Remember, we had a year's worth of data that started in 1st of June to the end of May, and the counters are still in place. And if we get 3 more months, we'll take a little bit of the slope. So if you look at the last figure that I've got here, I'm showing the prediction. The red is the normal exponential growth, and the green is the linear growth. And remember, the end point is erroneous because we did not do any counting on the south side of Sunshine Canyon. Red Rocks, the Centennial parking lot, and up Sunshine, none of that is being counted at all. So these are definitely low numbers to start off with. And then we've got this rate of increase. Well, which line is it going to be on? If we take 3 months of data, we can compare it and we get at least another trend as to which line we're on. So I hope that we can make that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so the next up is matters from the department, the update on Prairie Dog Working Group.
Right, and we have Carrie Davies here who's, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry, Carrie Canold.
One time.
All right,
Yeah.
for that update. So sorry.
It's okay. So as Tracy said, Carrie Canold, Community Relations Officer, and tonight I'm going to provide you all with an update on the Prairie Dog Working Group. So, it's not working. All right, so you might remember that in August of 2016, these folks, City Council, asked our city manager to form a working group. And so we did. And in building that working group, we set out to serve as a model for our city values, which were collaboration, innovation, and respect. And we wanted to build trust within the city's implementation of our existing policies and then the policies themselves. And our real charge, like the deliverable, was to provide consensus-based adaptive management recommendations to the city manager. And in doing that, the city of Boulder promised, and we're speaking about public participation promises, but we promised that we would look to that working group for advice and for innovation in their thinking, and that we would incorporate those ideas into our management decisions to the maximum extent possible. And in doing so, we provided an information packet memorandum to City Council and then 6 recommendations to the city manager for approval in June of this year. And in those recommendations, the 6th recommendation was to form a subgroup, which consisted of 4 of the working group folks and 5 of our staff. And in doing that, we met on August 29th, because keeping in mind, we're also doing relocations during all this time as well. But so we met on August 29th to start fleshing out those recommendations. And we were very successful on the 29th. So then we went too fast. So then we took those recommendations that we had started to flesh out and we took them to the whole group Monday of this week, so on the 11th. And that meant we had 5 recommendations to get through, to get consensus on those. We got through 2.5 of those. So you might also remember that we were charged to have a study session with City Council on the 26th of this month. However, these folks decided that they had other priorities that they needed to address, which actually worked out really well for us because we only got through 2.5 of our recommendations. And so our next steps will be to reconvene in late October, and it's that far out because of people's schedules, and we have some very important voices and perspectives that we want to make sure are able to participate. And so we will reconvene at the end of October, flesh out the rest of those recommendations, and then we will provide an information packet memorandum again to City Council with all those fleshed out. We can also come back here and provide a more in-depth revealing of those, because I think they're important. Keeping in mind that those phase 1 items were things that we could do, practices that we could implement under our existing plans and policies. So that was our phase 1 charge. So if we do that and we provide that IP and get approval on those recommendations sometime in November, that would be great, and that kind of wraps up our phase 1. Now we have to go into implementation down the road. But then our next charge is to come back, and we are anticipating having a phase 2 process. So everyone in the working group is in. They are on board. I think they see the value in doing this, which I think is great. And we'll begin our work on the phase 2 items, which are recommendations that would possibly and likely affect our existing plans and policies. And so we'll begin that work sometime in mid to late November. And we anticipate that carrying on through possibly May of next year, and then we'd have a similar process as what we had this year. So more to come on that, but I think that we'll maybe discuss how we could bring those recommendations to you guys in the future on the phase 1 after we do our build out. Any questions?
Or do you want to just mention the things that have been going on this summer that are sort of a start on some of the recommendations?
I think if I could speak in general terms, because I'm not really that involved with the relocation, so I apologize that I can't speak directly to them. But I think because of the work that we did in the working group earlier in the year and being really transparent and talking through some of the concerns that some of the people who are part of our working group had for what happened last year at the Armory, I think that our relocations went really well because we were simply communicating with people who care.
So maybe the important outcome is what didn't happen.
I think that's fair, Kurt. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, you guys.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie. And Molly, we do have one other quick update. Mark Davison is just going to do a very brief update on the uniform program.
Is that the uniform?
I hope not. I'm not quite up to fashion nowadays. Do we have the picture? Just a very quick update. We know that we've had discussions at the board in the past and in our department about a greater presence in the field for staff. And we also have been trying to set goals for customer service, professionalism within our department, as well as looking at, frankly, cost efficiencies in regards how we do the uniform for the department. So we started a pilot, and the pilot is in the community engagement work group with the education staff, the volunteers, and the outreach staff. And what you can see from the photograph here is approximately 20 more staff on top of the 20 rangers will now be wearing a uniform in the field, and this pilot will last for 12 months. And we're hoping just to test out a few things as we do it, regarding education programs, etc., the various presence, and we'll see how it goes. We'll keep you updated as the pilot moves along. But the final thing I just wanted to say, I don't know if you can see who's in the middle of that picture, but that's our city manager, Jane, wearing a portion of the uniform, not correctly in policy guidelines, but we'll let her off on this moment. But Jane has actually supported this. She'd like to see that as sort of a citywide thing, the uniform and how that raises customer service. So we're happy to be part of this pilot, and we'll bring it back when we get more updates. Any questions?
I like the Smokey the Bear hat.
Yes, Steve Notes was born to be a ranger. Okay, thank you.
Oh, great.
Thank you. Okay, so moving to matters from the board, and I guess we have our two master plan process committee people, if you'd like to speak.
I will take the lead on this, and since I will not be here next month, Tom will report for the meeting next month. And Mark, do we have that overhead? Leah's looking for it. Okay, great. So just to remind, Council has established a subcommittee to work on the public processes around the master plan development. This is being modeled on a similar subcommittee that Council established for the Boulder Valley Comp Plan update. And the subcommittee serves throughout the planning process. They help working with staff to frame a public process for the master plan, but they continue serving throughout the planning process. I know those of you that followed the comp plan update, there were some significant mid-course corrections that the subcommittee that was advising on that suggested during the comp plan process, and I think that's served very good purpose. So this process has started with Tom and I representing the Open Space Board of Trustees, and with Aaron Brockett and Mary Young representing City Council, and we've just had our second meeting. We met a couple weeks ago and got things kicked off, and then decided that our monthly meeting would actually happen at lunchtime on the day of our monthly board meeting. So we met for the second time at noon today. I think one thing I'll say before I get into the agenda here, which sort of sketches the things that we're working on right now, is that I think the timing of this was very beneficial related to the timing of the Public Participation Working Group. And you've probably all seen this graphic and the report from the Public Participation Working Group. So I just want to mention there's a conscious effort on the part of staff and the subcommittee to incorporate those concepts and recommendations from the group into the public process planning that we are just starting on now. So I think that will be evident through the whole process. I think there's two processes going on right now, or starting right now, that are just worth mentioning. And first, there has been a website established by staff, and it's too bad we don't have the address for it, but if you Google Open Space Master Plan Subcommittee, you will quickly get to the website that has the agendas and the schedule for this subcommittee, and the public is free to attend the meetings, and we, much like with the Prairie Dog Working Group, we have adopted having open comment from the public at the beginning of each meeting for 10 minutes, and I know some of the folks in the audience have attended. So there's a lot more information than we will go over today on that website, and that will continue to have updates. So an email list is being pulled together, and I think fairly soon there'll be a mailing out to that whole group, just reminding that there is this website, and here's where you can get more information, and here's where the meetings are. A project plan is being developed by staff and with input from this group, and that will, in fairly short order, give us sort of the roadmap for the whole master plan process and a lot of the public participation activities that go with it. And then one of the first things that the public will see, and is mentioned up here, is the system overview report. And hopefully, well, the target date up there is mid-November. Although that may get pushed back a little bit, this hasn't been updated, has it, Mark?
Yeah, Mark Davison, Community Connections Manager. No, it hasn't been updated yet from lunchtime.
Yeah, so we're still adjusting schedule. I think it's going to be a bit in flux, probably for another meeting or two. But I would say those are the two activities that are most underway right now, is the system overview report and the sort of the project plan and the public involvement process for the master plan. Both of those will get briefings to City Council and will be adopted by City Council before they're finalized and out to the public. But those will be fairly early milestones. Tom, you want to add anything to that?
Just a couple things.
Yeah.
One was we did, no decisions were made in the first two meetings that I think would, significantly affect our understanding of the substance of this. We all recognize that the first step in the 9-step process is to define what the issue is, but we're not, now we're just sort of setting up the process. I don't think anybody should worry that some decision got made that would define the scope of the master plan process itself. The second is on the email, that is using existing email lists, which I think most of those names and addresses come from either the West TSA or the North TSA. So if folks who are listening, if you were participated in those and haven't changed your email address, you'll be included in that. That's several thousand names and addresses, so at least it gets us off to a start, but obviously isn't anywhere close to the full community. And the third was that the date that is being discussed was for the rollout of the overview report itself. I had made a request, and I think we're in agreement on this, that the board should, before the entire report, the whole 150 pages comes out, look at least at a table of contents level, the main components of the report, so that we will have a chance to weigh in on whether there are things, particularly that aren't in there, that we do want in there, because that takes time to accomplish, and there may be other issues that arise, but I think there's been some interest on the board to get our hands on, at least in a macro sense, what's going to be in this sooner rather than later, and I conveyed then I think we're on track to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And it's worth underlining that the charter to this committee, again, is to work on a public planning process to recommend to staff and city council, and that does not involve identifying the issues that have to be addressed in the master plan. Those will come out of the public planning process. That's it in a nutshell.
Right. And I don't know if this is clear, but there'll be ultimately an email listserv that would include the board, so that it becomes a two-way communication device. So if people have comments to the board, it's a way of achieving that.
Yeah, right. So any board members.
It's not just the process committee, but it's actually the overall undertaking itself.
Right. Hearing no questions.
Okay.
You adequately conveyed that you're still very much in the setup process.
Yeah,
Early days.
Getting the bones in place, so
yeah,
thank you for your service.
yeah. And we're a ways out anyway, so it's good to get it started like that. Okay, so I guess we're next and,
Well, I don't know if there are other matters from the board. I had one.
Okay.
I don't know
I
if-
do as well.
Okay.
okay, go ahead, Tom.
I just wanted to, I don't know if this will precipitate some discussion, but I, like probably many people, went up on Chautauqua to see what our new trail was like, because it obviously had been a subject of considerable interest. And for those who don't know, it uses a technology which I don't think is completely new to open space, but it's certainly, this will be by far the most public trail that uses, I think it's called Staylock. But in any event, the important point is the technology, as I understand it, and certainly it's obvious when you walk on it, it makes the surface sort of harder and smoother, and I assume helps water flow off. And, as one would expect from sort of hardening a trail, makes the trail a lot more resistant to both use as well as weather events. To my mind, that there is some downside in that it feels a little less natural. It doesn't feel like you're walking on a sidewalk. It doesn't feel literally paved. But on the other hand, it doesn't have the more traditional sort of walking on dirt and rocks feel that we're accustomed to. And I think it's, worth, being candid about the trade-off here. My own sense is that it's a positive trade-off, that, you want to retain as much of a natural feel as you possibly can, but that trail, given the amount of usage it gets, given the amount of water that flows down there, you got to do something beyond just going back to the same old. And it seemed, my impression is that this is kind of a sensible step to hopefully harden and make that trail a lot more sustainable without, turning it into what's basically a paved sidewalk. So I thought it made sense to do that and wanted to sort of convey that. But I thought, it's not a trivial step for us to take in the direction of trails that, frankly feel a little more artificial, a little less natural than what people have been accustomed to on open space.
I had the same experience. It's a remarkable piece of work, and I assume, and I'll let Jim comment on it, but it strikes me that that's the alternative to having that trail go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it was probably this technology that allows us to maintain quite a steep grade. I mean, that thing sort of goes right down the fall line, and I think it would erode quickly if it weren't sort of armored. But I'm assuming otherwise we would have had to run it all back and forth over the meadow to maintain a reasonable grade. What's your thinking about it, Jim?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Kurt. We have so much traffic up there, and it is right down the fall line. This was the only option other than to extend that trail and do switchback after switchback.
Right.
And we didn't feel like that was the appropriate place to do that. And I do want to let folks know that we don't see a lot of other applications for this technology. But we did feel that this is really the only fix at this point for this one.
Cost-wise, I mean, was this?
It's fairly expensive.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Kelly, would you like to comment on that? We do happen to have the engineer responsible for that trail here tonight, so.
Good evening.
Kelly.
That's not why I came to talk to you all, but yes, so the cost is significantly more. The grades we can push with the stay lock is up to 20%, which is substantial. If we do normal surfacing, it depends on the cross slope. You guys have seen Greg's presentation a few times, but we try and stay within the 10% range. We can use what else is used in the meadow called a stabilized crusher fine, and that can push us up to 14% on a really good day. So this gets us to some steep inclines, and that's the reason that we went that route. It's about 1.5 times more expensive than a traditional crusher fine. So it's a substantial investment, and that was taken into consideration. However, the life cycle cost and the maintenance on doing something that is less sustainable is in our favor to do something now that makes more sense. Yeah.
Just a question about this stuff, since it's so firm, and as I'm looking at the website, it does not like water to go through it. What happens in the winter?
We're going to really see this winter. But it's completely hydrophobic. So a cool, fun thing to do is take your water bottle up there and dump it. It's crazy. It beads up. It's a wax component that makes it firm, and also hydrophobic. So the design of the trail is really intended to shed water. So it should, in theory, shed all that water. We've accounted for several different dispersion areas for that water to go across the trail, and then it should be much more amenable to foot traffic. And that was a major part of the original trail alignment, was that it gets so greasy in the winter. It's so slippery. People were walking on the vegetation. You know, we had trail segments that were 60 to 80 feet wide in some places. So that has been one of the amazing parts of that project, is that we've seen on-trail use really increase in the meadow, because it's very obvious where you go, and it's way more amenable to people hiking on trail. At least this summer, that's what we've seen. Yeah. Is there other questions?
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up, Tom. That's an interesting topic.
I have one little thing with with the matters from the board. I just wanted to say I went up on Flagstaff for the brass concert, and it was fantastic. And there were 13 musicians, and one of them taught my son French horn. So it was pretty amazing to be up there. And there were about maybe 150 people, but, you know, just overlooking the valley and hearing the music and, you know, and just celebrating the 50th. And I got choked up quite a few times. It was really amazing. So nice job by staff to do that. All righty.
I had one item.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. Thinking ahead to the board's potential role in the master planning process, which in my thinking is going to be very largely communicating between staff and council and bringing in public input and communicating what the master plan is all about to the public. I was reminded of something that I and my colleagues did when I served on the Transportation Advisory Board. And when we went through our master planning update, was basically we wrote a couple of op-eds, and the Daily Camera was rather amenable to publishing those. And so I wanted to kind of bring that up as an idea for this board to consider. As we embark on the master planning process, we can, you know, communicate to the public through the Daily Camera, hopefully, our vision for the master plan and what kind of input we want to get from the public, kind of get people riled up. And in noticing that the a good kind of riled. Yeah. It's enthusiastic. Thank you. That's a much better term. So I called the chair of the Transportation Advisory Board today, Bill Rigler, who I got to serve with on TAB as well, and wrote an op-ed with as well, and got his input on like, so how are you guys doing this, and how does this work? How do you do that as a board? Because you don't want to violate open meeting laws and all this stuff. And he volunteered to come and give a presentation to our board on how TAB has been doing outreach and communication with the daily camera. So if that would be of interest to this board, he'd be happy to do that. He is a city council candidate, so October might be a tough meeting time. Maybe November would be better, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there for staff and Molly to consider for a future agenda item.
Great.
I, for one, would be very excited to learn from the success of TAB, because during the Folsom right sizing thing, we got kind of hammered by the daily camera, and the relationship seems to have been transformed under his leadership. So, I think we could learn some great information from the experiences of TAB.
Great idea.
All right, thank you.
Right. Okay, so everybody good?
I'm good.
Okay. So now we'll move to the consideration of a motion to recommend that City Council authorize an amendment to the for design and construction of the Boulder Canyon Trail Extension intergovernmental agreement with Boulder County.
Good evening. So I'm Kelly Wasserbach. I'm the Engineering and Project Management Supervisor, Open Space. And you got to take 2 breaths to say all of that. And fortunately, Matt Wimpy's here tonight as well. He's from Boulder County Transportation in partnership with us to do this project. So real big questions, I'm going to defer to him. We have this great project team, the county, the city, Mueller Engineering has been our consultant, and then we have some CDOT funding, and actually their role has gotten much more substantial in the process in a very helpful way. So we've been grateful they're gonna overlay the canyon sometime next year, and so we've been able to model together and do a lot of the permitting as one, which has been really helpful. So, terms of the amendment, the big ask is for an extra $300,000 in addition to the money we have already contributed, which is $550,000. We did receive a match from CDOT of $4.4 million. The county is putting in the same amount of money, so it's a split match for the local match. We got cost estimates before going into this project in 2011. In case you guys didn't know, it rained a little bit a couple years later, and the cost of commodities has skyrocketed. So when we readjusted our cost estimate, we were way over. So we've looked at ways to redefine our scope to try and fit within our budget. We've done several big ticket items have been taken out, including the underpass at 4 Mile, and there was a separate pedestrian bridge to go from 119 to the Chapman Drive trailhead. We've eliminated that as well. So we've taken out roughly $1.5 million in reducing that scope there. So those were some big ticket items that seemed pretty amenable. The county did a ton of work to try and find a better path where we could keep these things, and it was not feasible. The canyon's tight, you're pretty confined. And the other thing that we did in the amendment was better define maintenance responsibilities and the limits of the project. So they start here, they end here, very clearly defined. We didn't know where we were going to start and end when we first went into the IGA, but now that we've fleshed out a better design, we understand those limits much better. This is the scope of the project. We're starting where it currently terminates at 4 Mile and going up to the Chapman Drive trailhead. So here are the project costs. Design and construction is roughly $7.6 million. Originally, the $4.4 million from CDOT, we've put in 55. The county has put in 550,000. And now we're asking for an additional 300,000 from each entity. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, and that is it. So quick and easy. But I'd love to answer your questions.
I just had a question. I'm unclear when I saw this proposed before. The 4-mile underpass was simply not put in due to cost. And then you just said it's because the canyon's narrow. And I just want to know, this seems like a key thing that should be done for the public safety at some point. But if it's too narrow, if it's like not physically possible, that's different from like, we got to spend another $1 million.
No, it's definitely because of the cost. And really the whole idea of the original of doing an underpass at 4 Mile was obviously, one, to get people into 4 Mile Canyon safely, but also to facilitate a new connection to the Patasso Preserve, which the county's been supportive of in our open space management plans. And it's something our Parks and Open Space group is looking at. But we basically, at this point, we're kind of focusing on what the CDOT grant is allowing us to do, which is extend the canyon trail up to Chapman. And then we've heard a lot of input from the community, and I think it's something that the commissioners as well are interested in pursuing in the future, of a connection potentially to 4 Mile and then something to Patasso as well.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to be clear. Thanks.
So when I said that it was narrow in there, I meant that we couldn't find another place to cross 4 Mile. So it will still remain where it is, but we didn't have other alignment adjustments that we could make in after that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had several questions. First, I gather that the CDOT contribution that's essentially fixed. And so as the cost goes up and down, we pay the differential.
Oh, apparently this was a very good question.
Yeah, so we applied for a grant in about 2012, and we received that from CDOT. It's a ramp grant, basically focused on getting worthy projects built quickly. So yeah, that amount is fixed. We've already gone to CDOT, and they've agreed to these scope changes. And you're very much right, where the city and the county as equal funding partners are kind of on the hook. And I do want to stress, I put estimate here, and I put estimate on the other slide as well. These are very much estimated costs right now. I'm pretty confident in our engineers' estimates for that. Mueller recently designed and opened the Clear Creek Canyon Trail in Jeffco. So they have a lot of experience with these types of projects, and they've been really good to work with. And we're looking at ways we can partner with CDOT on their project to hopefully save a little bit of money here and there. But you're right, we're pretty much responsible for everything else as part of our local match, or local overmatch in this case of the grant.
So is this ultimately being put out to bid?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
No, I said, the estimate is what you're just sort of telling because we have to do something.
We don't even tell the people that bid on it. So we know, so we have an engineer's estimate, and that's vaguely what it is. And it'll probably change when we do our final plans. But yeah, we're gonna put this out to bid. Most likely, we're working to hopefully have CDOT actually construct the trail as part of their overlay and flood recovery project in the canyon. And so the schedule is a little bit up in the air right now, because we're both working on some FEMA permitting, which is taking a little bit longer right now. But the hope is that we can kind of combine everything. So it may be where CDOT bids it as part of their project, but it'll definitely be going out over the $25,000 amount that we can approve internally.
I wanted to understand a little bit more what happened, because, and this isn't in any sense finding fault or anything like that, but it struck me that, and maybe it's my misunderstanding of the numbers, which will be the purpose of my questions, but that something really dramatic happened to the cost of this beyond those numbers. As I understood this, the original estimate was $5.5 million to get to the Patasso Link Trail. And now it's $6.1 million just to get to Chapman, which I think is less than half of, I realize there's an underpass that you have to deal with, but it's less than half of the original distance. It's like the length of this project got cut by more than 50%, because it's only half a mile from where 4 Mile, where the end of the current end of Boulder Creek path to Chapman's only half a mile on the road. The length of this got cut by at least half, but the cost went up by another 20% or so.
Correct.
It seemed like that was an enormous, I understand there was a flood, but that seemed like an extraordinary skyrocketing of costs, and I was curious sort of what, it can't just be that there's more, costs more to buy materials.
That's actually a large part of it. So we scoped this project originally in 2011, and we did a feasibility study, which I think OSMP actually led. And so that's when we got the cost estimates, and they were pretty rough. It was basically, X dollars per linear foot for this type of trail. And as we've actually gone into design work, talking with property owners, addressing their concerns, that's changed the design a little bit. 4 Mile, that underpass actually wasn't originally included in the scope of the feasibility study. So that is why we came in at that 7.6 number. Originally, it was much higher. And when we're joking, in 2008, right after the county passed our regional trail sales tax, we were getting projects coming in at bid about 40 to 50% under our engineers' cost estimates. That has changed substantially, and Kelly's really not joking that construction costs have gone up. Concrete in particular, which we normally build crusher fine trails, but there's a lot of concrete on this trail simply because we're so close to 119, and that's what CDOT requires. And there's also a lot of traffic control involved in this project. Because you're in a canyon, we're going to be looking at lane closures. We're not looking at full road closure, but definitely some lane closures, which does have an impact, and we have to put a lot of traffic control out there on pretty much a regular basis rather than putting it up, taking it down every day. So I will say it shocked us a little bit too when we first got the initial cost estimate when we were at 30% design. But it is consistent with other projects that we've seen, both trail and road lately, that design costs and construction costs just continue to rise as the economy improves and people are busier. And so we have to, they're bidding higher simply because they're busy. So
I'll mirror that the city's seeing something similar. Our purchasing department recently said that we're seeing bids come in at least 20% over engineers' estimated costs. It was a perfect storm of the flood, an increase in commodities cost and an increase in the economy, and so we've now seen this huge surge, and it's been substantial on several other projects as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
Yeah, well, it's a fact of life that,
Yeah. Do you guys have other questions?
I have a few.
Yeah.
This was not a planning process I was, following closely since I'm new to the board. So I had a couple of, building off of Kevin's question about the 4 Mile underpass, is the current design compatible with adding an underpass later? Or is it just going to be off the table forever because an alignment will never work?
It's convenient that the two things we've had to remove from the scope are at the very beginning and very end of this project. So it's fairly easy to, or I shouldn't say easy, it's feasible to come back and add them at a future point.
Okay.
And the designs we were looking at a conceptual level for the underpass weren't really dependent on the extension. They more connected into the existing trail that's out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me find my other questions. So on the Boulder Canyon Trail Extension project map, it looks like there's an artifact on there of little X's where the bike ped bridge used to be?
No, that's actually, there used to be an old road bridge that went over to the Chapman Trailhead in the old Red Line property, and we just haven't updated our aerial photography at the time that map was made.
Got it.
So there's a much wider bridge now that's built basically right next to it. That's out of the 100-year floodplain. And
so the X's are meant to look like an extra wide bridge?
Yeah, so that's what we use for the connection to Chapman. Right? Yeah.
I'm an ex-geologist, so I get driven nutty by symbols on a map that aren't on the legend. I'm like, what is this? I don't know.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Okay, and the same with the ABCs. I'm like, what are those? Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of areas where we're looking at potential connections to Batasso.
Okay. All right. Just want to, besides my own weirdnesses, I wanted to call that out in case it had implications for the IGA and its amendment. You want to have if that's included in there, you want to make sure it's pretty tight, right?
Thanks. This map is not included in the amendment.
No, I'm referring to this guy.
Oh, yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Specific to the amendment that we're being asked to vote on tonight. So the new section 10, which was quite interesting to read through. I was curious about 10C. County transportation shall be responsible for general maintenance and capital repairs on the trail extension. Maintenance practices will follow Boulder County Parks and Open Space maintenance policies and practices. And leading up to that is a section of the Boulder Creek Trail that is maintained as by open space or by
So everything basically, and the maintenance standards in the canyon are a little fuzzy. We're trying to clarify them.
Okay.
So basically where the paved section ends right now and then goes into the underpass way down canyon.
Yeah.
That's the cutoff between city and county maintenance. And so the county maintains all that crusher fine. What you're referring to is right before you hit Chapman, there's that small section that will go on open space property as a soft surface trail. And rather than have a small section, we don't, and I should say the soft surface, we don't plow it in the winter. We do a little bit of mowing and sweeping, or mowing at least in this case. But rather than have to have an open space crew go out there, we just figured it would be easy enough to add that portion of maintenance to the county. And then should the bike ped bridge be built at Chapman, then since city crews would be out there for the trailhead, they would be able to maintain that bridge.
Okay.
That was our thinking.
Okay. All right. That clarifies things for me. Thank you. And at the very beginning of the IGA amendment, in the first whereas statement, it ends with, from its existing terminus to the State Highway 119 tunnel. Well, I mean, the project has been rescoped, right? So
yeah,
a correct terminus would be good to include here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think those were the ones I caught. Okay, thank you.
Kevin? Yeah.
I already got my.
Okay. I just had a few left. We talked about quite a few things that I had down. I just had some general concerns about how we were going to minimize the disturbance to the HCA on the Chapman side. And then the materials being so close to the creek. That's a concern for me, how that, doesn't get dumped into the creek and is removed properly.
Yeah.
And then I'll start with those two and then I'll finish with a few more.
So there won't be any work done on the Chapman side. It just terminates at the bridge going into the Chapman Drive trailhead. So there will be no work done on the HCA of the Chapman area.
Okay.
We have had discussions at length about ecological conservation in this process, and the county's been really amenable to hearing our concerns. And so we've spec'd a lot of what you've said into our specifications, particularly we found some myrtle spurge when we did the Chapman Drive Trail project, so we've incorporated the state required or state suggested mitigation tactics for that, and then have Boulder County uses their open spaces standard specifications as their general standard specifications for anything ecologically based, and so it's very much in line with our standard specifications as well. So we've made a couple of tweaks here and there, but mostly like the erosion control and those things that we're often very picky about are already standard for the county.
Did the flood change the grading quite a bit? I mean, I'm wondering about the additional costs because that channel changed tremendously.
Further up in the canyon, there wasn't that much change, is my understanding. So the state and the county are currently remodeling the floodplain in Boulder Canyon, and we have submitted a certified letter of map revision to FEMA as part of this project. Just because there's a small portion that will be near the 10-year floodplain. And so we did a lot of modeling. We've submitted everything through the state since we're partnering on that project. and they've kind of incorporated the latest modeling that we have for the canyon in our application to FEMA.
And how we address the equestrian issue that we were talking about
For
before,
parking or for use?
just for use, yeah.
That's a question I need to answer, because typically on county trails, they are permitted. Horses are permitted, and I know it's sometimes different depending upon the trail for city open space properties, although you can probably talk, Kelly, about the plans for Chapmans and equestrians.
So I think we've shown you all several years ago, gosh, it is years now, the plans to extend the Chapman Drive trailhead to include equestrian parking. It came to our attention that there was only really a couple places to park your equestrian vehicle on the western corridor, so we're going to add that. It's in the floodplain, so we're waiting for the county to do all the modeling, and then we're going to just mooch off of that. But as far as use and access on the trail, the standards are the same as they are for other multi-use trails. The one underpass,
It'll be 8 feet tall.
maybe a little short, so you'd have to maybe get off your horse to go through that one. But other than that, an equestrian should be able to do it, and there should be access eventually from the Chapman Drive trailhead to get on the trail.
Well, I guess there was discussion about, you can spook a horse quite a bit, taking them in a low overhead, especially with the noise of a road going over. So I just wondered if we had evolved past that to any better design decisions on that. There are quite a few equestrians, believe it or not, that are on that Boulder Creek Trail. It's surprising. If you go up it in the afternoon on a weekend.
Yeah, so the design for the underpasses will be consistent with what's out there right now as far as height. So.
I'm sorry, are we using the existing underpass or building a new one?
We're building 2 new underpasses as part of this
Because
project.
the existing one's tiny.
So I have a funny story about that. We went through there, and Matt almost couldn't fit.
Yeah, I mean,
Because he's so
What are you
tall.
talking about, the existing
Chapman Drive
trail
one?
underpass or the Chapman Drive one?
I meant the one to go to Chapman.
Oh, yeah, the cow underpass.
Yeah, riding a bike through there is exciting.
Yeah, I can't really.
Yeah, it is.
fit through.
So if Matt can't fit, we gotta do something
Yeah.
different. That
Yeah,
was
we're gonna
our
take-
standard.
yeah. We're gonna take that one out and put a larger one in. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, anything else? Great work on this.
Thank you.
So we gotta,
Public hearing?
Yeah, do we want,
This is identified for public hearing, just
okay.
oh, okay.
Are there people who would like to speak about the Boulder Creek Trail extension? Okay. All right. Next up,
No, need a motion.
need a motion.
Yeah, we need a motion.
We do need a motion. Okay,
I'll move.
okay.
So I'll move the Open Space Board of Trustees recommend City Council authorize the attached First Amendment to the IGA between City of Boulder and Boulder County for design and construction of the Boulder Canyon Trail extension.
A second?
Point of clarification, do we need to add an as amended to take care of that
Yes.
change in the terminus?
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
You can just, I'm happy to do as amended.
okay.
Okay, all in favor? All right. Next up.
While we're transitioning, I just want to thank our Boulder County partner, Matt Wemby, for being a partner on that project. And thanks for Kelly and Matt working so effectively together.
Yeah, and I think it's a real high priority to get that done, and it's great to be able to leverage so much money. I mean, certainly we don't love paying more, but the amount that we're contributing is still all pretty small relative to the upside to our community.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Bethany Collins with Open Space, property agent, and we also have Lindsay Mers with transportation staff here, should you guys have any questions. This is the action item, tonight's agenda item is in front of you for action from a staff update you had gotten in April related to the Confluence Area Multi-Use Trail Project. And just as a reminder, if I can get this.
Oh, it may have been turned off. Just flip it up.
Of the area we're talking about. The confluence area is where Valmont, 61st, Andrus, and 63rd all kind of come together, as well as where South Boulder Creek, 4 Mile Creek. The reason it's called the confluence is obviously the confluence of the creeks. As a reminder of what we're talking about in this action item, transportation and open space staff, when it came, again, there's a lot of properties in this area that are owned by open space that are bisected by what is now the remnant of Pearl Street Parkway extension that is no longer, has been abandoned. Transportation has no anticipation to extend Pearl Parkway. And in doing that, as you can see, it goes through several open space properties. And in doing some planning in this area for some multi-use trail or path connections, open space and transportation staff have collaborated to basically create a land exchange. The 22-acre Pearl Parkway extension would come to open space for management, because of its quality habitat, because of it would, again, not bisect open space properties any longer, and so we can continue some of the riparian and restoration efforts in this area. As part of that agreement and planning efforts, they also wanted to implement some of these multi-use path connections and have collaborated with us on the best way to do that through open space without utilizing that right-of-way. Without obviously going straight through open space properties, we have discussed this idea of obviously just keeping it to the outer edges of the open space properties, as well as just connecting some of the already existing trails in the area that you see in yellow on this map. So the acquisition, transfers, and disposals we're talking about are on the screen. Open space would be acquiring what's in gray, the Pearl Parkway extension, approximately 22 acres. Transportation, which is the city transportation department, would be getting basically everything that's in crosshatch red that is not located along 61st Street. Those crosshatched would be a 10-foot wide paved path. It's called a transfer rather than a disposal because it is a transfer to another city department. It is not a disposal to an outside agency or a private partner. It is also called a transfer because there is no deed involved. It is a transfer of management and basically the land type interests in that property. This transfer is also proposed because these extensions, these connections will likely allow e-bikes on them. You guys have previously gone through the process of approving, and City Council now has approved an ordinance that in order for e-bikes to be allowed, it cannot be open space. It cannot be called open space. So we have to do these transfers pursuant to the Section 177 of the Charter in order to allow these transfers to take place and allow e-bikes. So we're turning it from open space to transportation. The area along 61st Street is a disposal to Boulder County in order to allow future road widening, which it would accommodate the right-of-way, the trail that will go along 61st Street, as well as bridge replacement over Boulder Creek. So I know there was some confusion in the memo, and I want to remind you guys of what the role is of board. So there is a recommendation role in Section 175 of the Charter for you guys to approve the acquisition of that 22-acre Pearl Parkway right-of-way to come to open space. There is also an approval. You must also approve the transfer to transportation and disposal to Boulder County by an affirmative vote of at least 3 members under Section 177 of the Charter. That's following the disposal provision. You must also recommend that City Council approves the transfer and disposals under that same Section 175 of the Charter. So that's why the motion that'll be in front of you for tonight is rather lengthy, because it involves both approval by you as well as a recommendation that City Council approve several elements of this. So having received a rather lengthy presentation in April from transportation staff and the memo in front of you that reminds you of a lot of the things you heard, and in interest of your time, I wanted to open it up for questions.
I'd like to make a few comments first. One is, I think it's confusing for the public, the citizens, to understand the difference between transfer and disposal. So while we're on camera, I'd like to take a minute to explain that. The transfer process avoids the public input, and disposal involves the public input. So one of my concerns right off the bat is that the language that's used so much in this proposal has so many words, transfer, when in the past what we've asked is not to have that as a part of the language. I realize that the end result is to use 177 as the charter, the vehicle for this, but I want the public to understand that there's a big difference between these two words. And then I'd also like to say to the trustees that I feel very strongly that what we're doing is we need to take it very seriously. We are trustees. We're not a voluntary advisory board. We're in the trust of the land, and that's our job. And our fiduciary responsibility is to make sure that the lands are given the way that they're meant to be given, and for open space purposes only. And so with that, I'll open up to questions, but I want to make sure that the public's aware of what this proposal is. Who would like to speak?
I just wanted to, you said this, but I don't think I took in the full significance of it. So what we are proposing to dispose of, whether to the transportation or to the county, is a 10-foot wide section that corresponds to the various dotted red lines?
It's a 10-foot wide section where the lines appear to be trails. Along 61st Street, it will be about 45 feet, or no, an additional 20 feet on each side of the road. In most places near the bridge, they will likely need a little bit more. And so that's why right now the acreages given in the memo are approximate. The disposals will only, and transfers will only take place as the projects move forward and as those better designs and legal descriptions are identified. And also keep in mind, along 61st Street and the disposals to Boulder County will be via a right-of-way easement, not in fee.
So wherever there's a dotted red line that is currently on city open space, because some of those red lines aren't on
This is a little bit better, yes.
Right.
There
Wherever
you go.
there's a dotted red line that is currently on city open space.
Correct.
That is what we are putting aside the transfer disposal issue, but that is what we're getting.
Correct. And to clarify what Molly was saying as well, we are handling both via Section 177 of the Charter.
And could you just tell us a little bit about, I understand it's not very wide and it's not it's not an enormous amount of acreage, but tell us a little bit about just sort of what are the qualities of the land that we're proposing to dispose of. I'm not sure I have a good feel for, I mean, some of it's obviously just right along the side of the road, but I'm less familiar with the northern edge of straight decline.
Correct. And that will be right along the fence line. So, you know, that's as agricultural, that is currently an agricultural field. And I believe it's dry land agriculture, as well as the east side, the Colorado open lands parcel is dry land, and it actually isn't irrigable right now. They can't get water to it because of the topography. So these are open hay, native vegetation that obviously get a little bit more sparse and impacted as you reach the fence lines. And so it was, you know, in walking these properties and in working with transportation and open space planning staff, while they could, transportation really could, again, kind of follow their right-of-way and implement the trail that way, or the current right-of-way. We said, you know, this is the better route, both to avoid kind of some wetland and the best crossing of, I think it's 4 Mile Creek, as well as the best crossing of, the best approach, again, following the fence lines.
Thanks.
Staying to the exterior of the properties rather than obviously fragmenting them.
And I think I got this, but just to make sure, the net of these various transactions is that we gain 17.5 acres?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I had.
And do you have questions?
Oh, no, I have no question, but I will say that by acquiring the right-of-way from the Pearl Parkway proposal, we have an opportunity to put under common management a very large contiguous block of that, where there used to be this big stretch through the middle that was not under our management, and that's a big opportunity for us.
I don't have any questions. I'm happy to provide comments if there aren't public comments, but isn't that kind of their normal order?
I think we'll move to public comments after a few clarifying.
I have no clarifying questions.
Okay. Okay, Jim Creighton.
Jim Crane, 8380 Snafflebit Court, Littleton. I was the open space director between 1979 and 2002. So I've maintained an interest in what you're doing, and I think you're doing a fabulous job. In reviewing the memo that you have before you, I have some concerns, and they deal with the last two paragraphs on page 4. And so I just want to raise those concerns with you. And the first sentence of that first paragraph, talks about existing paved trails that would be better managed by the transportation department. That is a statement that is just thrown out there without any backup, without any discussion. And the implication is open space property would then be transferred to the transportation department because it would be maintained better. So what are the circumstances? Why would it be maintained better? What are the current costs, and what are the current problems with your maintenance of those properties? So I think that in talking about transferring a chunk of open space to another department, that you should have a study session. What is the value of the land that is being transferred? What are you gaining? And what I'm concerned about is that if this becomes your policy, anytime you develop an open space trail, whether it's for handicapped access or because the trail is getting a lot of use from your customers, that you then create roads throughout open space. And the whole purpose of the open space program was to congregate, bring together open space lands and have them contiguous without those kinds of things coming in between them. So I think that's something that you should consider, and I would recommend that you have a study session. The second is in the second paragraph, support accepting transfer of the 22 acres and basically you wind up with 17 and a half acres. And my concern there again is process and policy. What's the actual value of what you're giving up? Now, in this case, it looks like a pretty good deal. But you should have an appraisal of what you're giving up. What is the cost? What is the value, not what is the value of what you're giving up? And then what's the value of what you're getting? And that should be an independent appraisal because you don't know what you're giving away. You may be giving away residential property for agricultural property, and 5 acres for 22 sounds pretty good. But that's not the way that I think that you should be doing that. I think that you should have a disposal process for any piece of open space that you decide to dispose or transfer. Because in my opinion, disposal and transfer, it's the same thing. You lose that open space forever. It's not yours. It's not the public's anymore. And I suggest, and this is just off the top of my head, and it really that you should put more thought into it. So why is the property given away? What is the current use of that property? What was the original cost to acquire that property? The current and what is the current value as determined by an appraisal? So I think you need to go through all those steps, and at the end of those steps, you need to say, well, this is a good deal or a bad deal, and then determine what the impact is going to be on the open space fund. Finally, I have a concern, and Tracy, I have a concern that I think there's a conflict of interest for you here. You were transportation, you worked in the transportation department before as a transportation engineer, and this property is being recommended to be given to the transportation property at no cost. And I would say that when there is an apparent conflict of interest, that you should recuse yourself and have the other staff members put together the memo and come to the conclusions, whatever that might be on the part of the department. So those are my comments today. Thank you for giving me the time to address you.
Questions, comments?
I have a comment. I'll just say I think this is another example of really smart decision-making. I hear a lot of the concerns that were just raised about what happens with transfers and value and things like that. But I think ultimately, I don't think of open space as my primary concern. I think of the people of Boulder and the community as my primary concern. And in this case, I see a clear example of how these peripheral area could be used as a means of transporting people for recreation and for commuting by non-gas-powered means as being really good. And I think that this is actually a way of minimizing a lot of other impacts that we have in our community. So I think this is a great idea. When it was initially presented, I thought it was a great idea in April. Because I know people who live in places where this would be a major connecting route for them to get to work, to get to school, to get to places to eat or whatever. It's a big hole in our sort of bicycle and pedestrian transportation system. So I think, that being said, I think it's a really good idea. I understand a lot of the concerns, and I think I really feel as if a lot of the challenge that open space always has is, we acquire or manage lands, but the geography of that is not well defined. It could be within the city limits still. It could be outside of the city limits. Sometimes it's in a different county. And so I think management partnerships such as this is a really good example of how to reduce our burden, because doing something like going out and plowing snow on a half a mile of trail in the middle of city transportation department managed trail seems like a pretty hard burden for us to have to bear when we don't need that infrastructural management at all anyplace else. So in the last time that this happened, when we discussed a couple of other transfers of paved paths within the city, I felt the same way, that I really just want the trail to be managed well. In this case, as in that one, the open space that's directly adjacent to it is still managed by our department as it should be, as open space. And that I think that's a really good division of labor for the purpose of something that's in the middle of our city. So that's my comment.
Tom?
So I think I and we do take disposals very seriously and spend a lot of time looking carefully at exactly what's being proposed and why. And to me, there's a variety of criteria here, all of which point in the same direction. One is that it appears that what's being proposed for disposal is the minimum amount necessary to achieve what we're trying to do here. It's not like we're just sort of proposing to dispose of land that far exceeds what will be needed. These are pretty narrow corridors that we're talking about. Second, we are, it's for an important purpose, both in terms of this overall project and which I think serves a lot of open space purposes. And, obviously a portion of this, the disposal is occurring because of the e-bikes, but that's there's been a decision by the city that that's something that we want to have available as part of our transportation network. And so, given our view of passive recreation and open space, that sort of dictates that we have to dispose of the minimum amount necessary to, if we're going to have that kind of paved path. And the third is, I think we're getting good value for what is proposed for disposal. We're getting 5 acres for every 1 acre that we give. Listening to the description of the land, what we're giving up, along fence lines, along roads, seems almost inconceivable that that land has a higher value per acre than what we're getting in return, and we're getting 5 acres in return compared to what we're giving up. So it seems to me that it checks all the boxes that we would need to check in order to do a disposal.
I'd just add the public safety benefits too. I think they're significant here.
Andrea?
I have nothing more to add.
Well, I have significant concern about doing this in that we don't know the price of what we're getting versus what we're giving up. We don't have an evaluation for that that's exact. And it's concerning to me to set this standard that we're essentially doing a swap. The language concerns me very much in that council has given us directives not to include this language over and over again. I counted 17 transfer words to 7 disposals. I find this confusing for the public, and I also feel like to do a swap when we don't really know what the value is, how can we possibly do that? And if we start this, going down this road where we're just giving X to get something, do we really know that this 5 acres is not worth way more than what the 22 and the difference net is? So given that there's no figures on this, it would be hard to evaluate. And I think since this has come up so many times with so many parcels, ever since I was on the board, this is about the 8th time that kind of parcels and bushel baskets have come. I would be in favor of doing a study session and trying to figure out what the real dollars and cents are on this so that we really know what we're getting and what we're giving. And it's noticed to the public, and it's something that they can be a part of. Because the 11 parcels was concerning to me, and then it came back with the 13, and there's been a lot of this kind of back and forth. If we're moving into a transportation mode, and I want to be absolutely clear here, because comments when a person is perceived as an environmentalist, is taken that I don't want connectors and I don't want transportation. That's not true. I'm excited about the connectors, but I'm nervous about the trend. And I'm nervous about stamping on a directive something that essentially transfers land. And that becomes something that becomes a precedent. And then is the next process, and we don't know what that price is going to be. And this feels like very much like a slippery slope. I've had a lot of citizens who have read me, talked to me, and said that they're very concerned over this process, and I have to agree. If I had on this document some type of money, I could say, okay, we know we're getting this, and it has these mineral rights, or it has this, or we're going to have access, or we know that the master plan is going to tie into this eventually, or we know that this wetland is not going to be impacted or further down the road, then I would feel much more comfortable with these types of proposals. But given that there's no tangible money, I don't see how we can make a rational decision.
One thing I can tell you in due diligence on these properties, they were deed restricted when they were sold to us. And so they are deed restricted with the exception, the right-of-way is the only thing that can be developed for anything other than an open space or recreation or agricultural or wildlife habitat purpose. So residential development is not allowed on these parcels if for any reason they were transferred or valued as if they were not owned by open space. They are not residential, they are not developable other than the road right-of-way. So we at Open Space would be open, and I think transportation would, if you guys direct us to get an appraisal, as long as you understand the right-of-way will likely come back at a significantly higher value, and Open Space would, transportation could look to Open Space to transfer funds for the additional acreage.
Well, in theory.
And also, sorry, go ahead.
This could become a full-size road, correct? In the future.
The right-of-way is 100 feet, or 50 feet. 50 feet wide in most places. Yes.
So Bethany, I think what you're suggesting is that the land we are getting, which is the Pearl Parkway right-of-way.
Correct.
Would come in almost certainly vastly more dollar valuable than these other pieces of property.
Right, because it would have to be valued as if a road could be built on it, yes.
And, Molly, your questions in my mind raise the question of whether for something like this, the dollar value is the most important thing. I'd be more concerned, and you mentioned it, if there were things that were really disparate in terms of their ecological value. If we were getting, dry land pasture and we were giving up wetlands or something like that, I think that to me would be much more critical, because I'm sort of where Tom is. It's hard to see how we're not going to end up, however you monetize it, getting a lot more than we're giving up in terms of dollars. And looking at the alignments we're giving up and having walked all of those, compared to the riparian area that's right along the parkway, or maybe not riparian, but maybe wet meadow. I think from an ecological standpoint, too, we're probably getting better than we're giving. So I guess my question to you is, are you more concerned about the apparent precedent of donating open space lands for multi-use trails? Is that sort of the trade-off that starts to raise red flags for you?
I'm concerned about the donating. I'm concerned about the process in that when we spent citizens' funds and we told the citizens this was being bought for open space purposes, and then it gets turned into transportation purposes, then we have to turn back to the citizens and say to them that we are doing something different than was intended with the land initially. And that is a great concern. How are we going to validate this to our citizens? And if it continues, how are we going to address these issues?
These, again, the transfers, at least to transportation, are again, to satisfy the e-bikes ordinance, we have to turn it to not open space. And those, the MOUs, the document we do use to carry those out have a reverter clause that if they are not used for that paved path with e-bikes, they revert back to open space. You know, they change color back on the map, back to green. So, and I don't know if that's kind of what you're getting at, that once it becomes transportation purpose, they could put a road instead of a bike trail. They can't.
But it sounds like, whereas we, open space, we could decide to put a single track bike path through that area. It's different running a strip of concrete and having it be a regional connection for multi-use paths. And that takes it, at least in your thinking, outside of charter purposes.
Mm-hmm. Most of the paths I presented in July that we talked about, we have paved paths all over open space that are managed by transportation. We don't do the snow plowing. We don't do the mowing along the sides. They are managed by transportation, many of which we have not, again, changed the color. We have not transferred. Many of which don't, or some of which don't allow e-bikes. The issue here, the ones that you are seeing, because, could you put that back up by any chance? Oops. So the yellow paths you see are already paved paths on open space, and all except, so all of which allow e-bikes or are meant to allow e-bikes. So where you see down near KOA Lake, there's kind of a, and this is what the question was about the fourth paragraph of the paths we were talking about. Down there you see where it jumps from not being conveyed to or being transferred to transportation versus kind of part of the loop under KOA Lake already has for e-bikes. And so we are trying to, basically complete or fill in those gaps, so because it doesn't make sense from an enforcement standpoint for anyone to, or a signage standpoint or a management standpoint, for it to be transportation, open space, get on, get off your e-bike. If this is going to be, again, a commuter, the purpose being in the TMP, a commuting trail from Gun Barrel to at least the Andros to Airport connection to into the city, and these are meant to be commuter trails, and they're, each side is already allowing e-bikes and has already been transferred. Why we're justifying these for transfer, again, is because they will be paved, they are in open space, but they will allow, or they want to allow e-bikes on them, and so that requires that transfer to transportation.
So I'm strongly in support of this idea. I think this is, for me anyways, a bad case of like a reason to really deal and ask these questions in this depth. However, what this seems to bring up to me, that seems to be maybe something that I would be happy to approach this council or staff or anyone with you, is let's get rid of an e-bike ban on open space and make it into e-bikes belong on open space on trails where they're supposed to be and not where they're not supposed to be, so that we can have a trail that's in city open space that's part of a commuting system, and they'll have e-bike on it. And we don't have to worry about transfers or anything like that if that doesn't make sense. So it no longer becomes the trigger for why we have to transfer. And then we can say there's a class of open space trails where e-bikes should never be, but it's not open space trails means no e-bikes. It's these open space trails should not have e-bikes and these should, and therefore we don't have to do a transfer every time. And if we feel like management should be conducted by transportation for whatever reason, or we want to do a transfer, that's no longer the trigger. So we're not having competing goals of transportation for the purpose of commuting on an e-bike versus who's going to be managing that land. I would be happy to write a note or help in that sort of pursuit if that's something that you think would help. I think that this is the second time I've been on the board that the e-bikes has been the trigger. I'm a big fan of e-bikes and I'm a big fan of transportation, but I also feel like this shouldn't be a trigger. This shouldn't be a reason why we have to transfer lands from one management to another. It should be transferred because it makes sense for it to transfer because of management challenges. Anyway, I would put that out there as I would happily try and work up some sort of recommendation if that's something that the rest of the board wants to do as a means of trying to resolve these same situations in the future.
Well, I think it would be hard to get around the charter that says no motorized vehicles on open space.
Actually, a state law passed last year since the city's ordinance that defines e-bikes as not only, there's actually 3 levels based on how fast they go, basically. And the 2 lower ones in the majority of e-bikes are actually now not classified not as motorized. They're defined out of.
So technically the charter's in violation of state law.
It's a question of what the phrase passive recreation in the charter means.
Right.
That's, we, you know,
Yeah.
not
Correct.
we alone,
Yep.
but we as a city can decide
Yes.
passive recreation has a broad meaning or a narrow meaning to either include or exclude e-bikes. That's our own decision about how we wish to view
And
our
that's-
own governing document.
That same act did say, it said this is how the state law reads, but municipalities get to govern on their trails. Yeah.
And to be clear, I'm not advocating we try to change this. I'm advocating that we can write a letter to city council saying, look, this is a problem again and again, and it's running us into these issues of transfer disposal, blah, blah, blah. Can we get some guidance about how to deal with this? Because we don't anticipate this ending, as there are probably more paths that are not in the mountains, that are not in the wilder parts of our area, that eventually will have the same questions come up as more people want to commute by an electric assist bicycle. I don't know. I'm okay to retract it. I was just saying, like, this might be a way that we could try and express our concern.
Would it be possible to do a study session with council on this issue?
And I suppose a related question is, does this have to be decided on today? Are there things we're holding up, or is this one of those, like, this is something that the departments would like to take care of at some point kind of deals?
What's your timeline? I'll let Lindsay talk to that.
Okay, well, sorry, Tracy was going to.
I was going to, on the study session part, that would be new to the city council's work plan. And so I would anticipate it would have to be with the new city council, not with the existing city council, and would need to work on that with the council agenda committee. So I wouldn't be able to, I can't project or guess when that could fit on the council's agenda. Mm-hmm. They have their council retreat toward the end of January. I know that.
Thank you.
And when this was brought up, 2 years ago, maybe? I mean, I remember because we were addressing council on this issue, there was a definite perception that for purposes of the charter, there was a bright line definition of passive recreation as distinguishing, presence of a motor, at least in a motor in moving the human. There are other issues about, what if the motor is serving some other purpose. such as on a drone or on maybe even a camera or, some other piece of electrical equipment where the motor doesn't move the person, but the motor nonetheless has a motor. And we didn't get into the sort of subtleties of where exactly you drew that line. But I think it was, the view that in that discussion from both the people who were present, some of whom had, done a fair amount of research on what passive recreation means in various statutes across the country, some of which go to some lengths to define it, that while it's not completely uniform, the more common understanding of passive recreation is you can't have a motor. Now, it may be that there is a cultural change going on here that would cause us to re-examine that issue. But I think that's probably a fair characterization of the discussion we had the last time we were before council on this.
It sounds to me like an issue that you would want to discuss during a master planning process. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think it's an issue that's going to take quite a while to resolve, and I'm not sure I want to shackle this. It just seems sort of out of scale to try to solve these questions by something that big in such a policy question.
I think Kevin's raising a fair point, and I think you're raising a great solution. I think there should be, at some point, a public discussion on, as our thinking about what passive recreation means changed a little bit, and, e-bikes are an interesting mix, or they are. As anyone who's ever used one of them knows, there is still a very active component. It doesn't,
Doesn't pedal for you.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you're okay with that, and you may not be, that may be something that's part of a broader discussion.
I mean, I tend to agree with, I think, what you're saying, which is like, I don't want to shackle what we're talking about in this bigger plan to this. I think this is a really good question to bring up. My opinion on e-bikes has changed significantly since when this first came up. I addressed city council and I said, I have my concerns. Like, these are a new thing, and I've ridden one around, and they can be pretty zippy. But in the last couple of years, I've seen so many of my friends and neighbors who started commuting no longer by car because of an e-bike. And they're not going out for recreational rides on their e-bike. They're going to work. They're going to their friends' houses or groceries. And I think that's something I didn't really anticipate exactly how it would change and for whom. And I don't know that I have a sense of where it's going, but I think that that's changed my sense of where it's come from to where it is now. And I don't know how to resolve it, but I definitely think that if this is going to keep coming up, I would rather have questions of transfers, disposals, or whatever, not have to do with whether or not someone can bicycle to work, and have to do much more with issues of like, what's the best management of this land and whether it has a high ecological value or whatever. I think that that's a really good question to have. So anyway, that would be my suggestion, is that we try to find a way to revisit this as a community sometime in the relatively near future. And maybe Kurt's idea of like, this is a good thing for the master plan, especially since I won't be here anymore.
And Lindsay and I often try to emphasize and reiterate, there is a speed limit on all of these trails, whether you are on a road bike and exceeding that speed limit, or you are on an e-bike and exceeding that speed limit. You're exceeding the speed limit. And so they're held to the same speed limit, and both do absolutely have the ability of violating that. So.
And I was going at I'm sure it was not over the speed limit, but going solidly at the speed limit. And there was a motorized skateboard who was absolutely keeping up with me.
And in the interest of full disclosure, my normal Wednesday night is to ride along these same path segments on an e-bike to go out to 75th and Valmont to pick up my farm share with my son. That is not something that your typical person can do without the aid of an e-bike. And very much, the confusion with like, which path segments do I need to have the motor off? Do I need to be walking? It is confusing as an e-bike user. So, I am somewhat biased, having served on the Transportation Advisory Board before serving on this board, that I do see value in these connections, both as a user and to meet our transportation goals. And to to balance that out, I mean, I'll reiterate now in the more appropriate section of our discussion that I'm really excited about getting the land in this swath through the middle. It's like contiguous habitat blocks and common management. And it seems a small sacrifice to lose a little bit of the edge. But I agree, Molly, and I'm so glad you bring this voice to the discussion. And I agree that the public should be very involved in these discussions and a master plan. We should bring this forward prominently in the master planning process.
Well, I'd like to make a motion unless someone feels a need to, because I think we've agreed to unshackle it.
Is that your motion?
That's unshackle it. Set it free. I'm going to have a few changes, nothing, so.
It's a long motion.
Well, and you may change the one on the screen because the one in the packet doesn't have the approve and recommend kind of language, so, but your changes probably are even different.
Take all the time you need.
Yeah, okay, no, I think, okay, so I move, yeah, I want to break these down. Move the Open Space Board of Trustees approve a motion to TO, and then paren number 1, then get, end the paren, and then get rid of the word and. A motion to 1, recommend that City Council approve the transfer of approximately 22 acres of land from the City of Boulder Public Works Department - Transportation Division to the Open Space and Mountain Parks Department for open space purposes, and 2, put that in parentheses, and, paren 2, approve and recommend that City Council approve, get rid of the comma, and get rid of together with, so approve the transfer of approximately 2.75 acres of open space land to the City of Boulder Public Works Department - Transportation Division and approximately 1.75 acres to Boulder County, comma, both of which are pursuant to the disposal procedures of Article 12, Section 177 of the Boulder City Charter for the Confluence Area Multi-Use Path Connection Project. And I was trying to do 2 things. One was, some of this is a recommendation, but the disposal part of it, we actually have to approve. And I was trying to, by separating these 2 things, get the verb, one's a recommendation and one's an approval. And obviously, I wanted to add some language, making clear that both of the transfers are disposals. So that's my motion.
I'll second that.
All in favor? I'm saddened by this tremendously. I think we've made a big mistake.
Molly, I'm still open to a number of the issues you raise about disposal and transfer processes and how they should be done. I mean, you've raised questions about, do we have the information we really should have? And if you want to propose that as a topic for a study session in the future for us, because it is complicated, and I absolutely agree. It confuses the heck out of me, and I think the public too. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I think you've raised a bunch of important questions, and if there's a way we can get have a better discussion with staff and maybe even move towards clarification of what our procedures are, I would certainly be open to that. I think it's worth doing.
And I would add, maybe this goes without saying, but often it doesn't hurt to say it. I would hope that if anyone faced with a disposal motion felt they wanted a field visit from knowledgeable staff to go see exactly what's there with an ecologist to kind of walk through what we're talking about, that they would feel completely comfortable asking, and I'm, recognizing time could be tight, but staff would do everything possible to accommodate that.
Any other comments? Okay, we're adjourned.